Hello and welcome back to Random Librarian here on YouTube. Today I am doing a video in preparation for my next readathon because I had so much fun doing the Asian readathon in May. It really helped me kind of focus on a certain stack of books, even though I know I pulled way too many to really be all read during that month, but it gave me a sense of what I had on my shelves and also encouraged me to read more, which is always good. So I'm going to be reading from my shelves for Pride Month and pulling books that feature LGBTQIA plus characters and go from there. But I figured I'd start with books that I have read that I have absolutely loved that fall under that umbrella. So I'm gonna start with two that are more historical fiction, and that is The Color Purple, which I feel like everyone should read. Like, if you haven't read it, go out and get it right now. Skip everything else on your list. This book will absolutely break your heart. I read it last summer, I think in a day, and I was just rocked. It's stunning and painful, and just please read it if you haven't. Next up we have Hood by Emma Donoghue, and this is a book that takes place in Dublin, I think 1970s and then also 1980s. So this was when being gay or lesbian, any kind of not straight, was punishable by a jail sentence, I believe. And this follows Penn and Kara, who fall in love when they're in high school and have this tumultuous relationship that's based on the Odyssey. So Penn is the ever-present, ever-waiting Penelope, and Kara goes off and has adventures and cheats on Penn, and then the modern, so like the 1980s part of it, is Penn coming to terms with the fact that Kara has died and not knowing how to grieve because she's a widow, but no one knows that she's a widow. I read this in college for a class called Major Irish Writers, and Emma Donoghue came and spoke at my college, so I have it signed. You probably know her better from Room. She is now living in Canada, I believe, with her wife and their kiddos, and I am obsessed with her. Like, we'll read anything Emma Donoghue publishes. So those are my two like historical fiction ones. This actually might warrant more than one video now that I'm looking at my recommendations and books that I'm trying to prioritize piles, but we'll just carry on. We'll just see where we go from here. One other one that's kind of historic and also Irish is Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Lefinu. So this is a vampire story that was created pre-Dracula and features a lesbian couple, lesbian vampire, and was turned into a loosely inspired web series and movie, I believe. So you might be familiar with that if you want to read the base material. Carmen Maria Machado actually edited this version, and there's some really gorgeous illustrations that were included. And it's a wild read. Something to be careful of is that it was, you know, written by a man, originally serialized from 1871 to 1872. So the more sexual elements of the book, especially considering that it is a young female vampire, or I guess an old but young female vampire seducing a young pious girl, means that that's not treated well. Like, that's not seen as like a romance, it's seen as a danger. But I still recommend it. It is a very fun story, and reading it from a modern lens, you're like, yeah, be in love with the vampire, go off. So that's this. I also love the new cover, and also Carmen Maria Machado. Let's see, what else do we got on this list? I have two that are kind of everyone's favorites. You've probably already heard them recommended about a million times, and that is Red, White, and Royal Blue, where a by son of the female president of the United States falls in love with the Prince of England. It's just a very fun novel, and Casey McQuiston is coming out with a new novel, this time with two girls/women, I'm not sure what age they are, and New York, and I think some time travel. I haven't tried to look up too much about what it's about. I just want to dive into it, and I have it on audio, so that's definitely what I'm going to be reading. Then this is everyone's other favorite, which is The House in the Cerulean Sea, which is a magical, mystical, funny, just lovely examination of found family involving magic and monsters and the expectations of the outside world placed on these kids who maybe have too much power or just are slightly too different for extremely upper management to feel comfortable. And it's just so perfect. I love this book so much. I have some other books by TJ Klune in my to-read pile as well, so anything by TJ Klune. This next one is kind of a problematic fave in that it needs like a mile of trigger warnings. And I've talked about this on my Instagram, I talked about it on Goodreads. I would definitely recommend checking the story graph for all of the trigger warnings that people have assigned to each book in this series so that you can read it if you're not going to be triggered by it. But stay away from it if that long list could hurt you. So this is kind of everyone's problematic fave, and I read it because I'd seen it talked about for so long. So this is the All for the Game trilogy, The Vauxhall Court, The Raven King, and The King's Men. I think the romance doesn't really like kick off explicitly until The King's Men, but I would die for the foxes. Some more magical / mystical elements is what we've got for the rest of this pile. The Deep by River Solomon is absolutely transcendent and just lyrical genius. If you're going to read it, I also recommend listening to the audiobook because it is narrated by Daveed Diggs, because he and his musical group did a previous iteration of the same story, which is really cool because it's kind of like this game of telephone from the original musical piece to the next group that did it. I think it's clipping to this iteration and its audiobook component, and it's just stunning. So if you haven't read the Deep yet or don't know anything about it, it's about the children of pregnant African people who died on their way to the New World where they were going to be enslaved. So those pregnant mothers, if they died and were thrown into the ocean, their children become something like mermaids. So it's the Wajinru is what they're known as, what they're called. And they form this society where they go and find other Wajinru and bring them back and have them be part of the community. And one person holds all of the memories of all of the atrocities that have happened to their foremothers, their people, everyone throughout time. So everyone else has very short-term memory, and our main character, Yetu, has all of the memories. And once every however many years, they have a remembering, like a ceremony where everyone takes on all of the memories and Yetu is able to kind of breathe. And then every time they don't want to remember that because it's painful, so they will give it back to the person who does the remembering for them. God, I love this book. I love it so much. So this is a very, very quick read. Yetu does have a little bit of a romance here with a female woman. Also, the Wajinru, I believe, are intersex, but I have to relook that up and make sure that I'm using correct terminology. So definitely something to pick up. Again, I kind of think for everybody, even if you don't like fantasy, it's so good. Oh my God. Next up, another book that I think everyone should read is Each of Us a Desert. Oh my gosh. This book, like, owned my soul and my mind last summer when I read it. So Each of Us a Desert is this also incredibly imaginative magic system, and it involves memories. So when I read these, I read them kind of close together, and both are just top notch. Absolutely incredible. Want to recommend to everyone. It's incredible. I know I just said that. But this is, I think they just call her Zoe through most of it, so that's what I'm gonna say. And Amelia. And Zoe has the power to absorb either bad memories or like the demons that accompany them. And then part of her role as this sort of like mystical, almost religious figure is to take those in and then to give them back to the earth. So she doesn't remember the awful things that people tell her, but they get to unburden themselves and put this huge burden on her shoulders. So Amelia and Zoe go on this journey because Zoe doesn't want to be like this. She wants to give up her power so that she can be normal. And oh, it's just so good. I'm probably gonna reread this one because I listened to the audio and I read it, and now I feel like I could just read it. The audio for this is also very good and helpful because it does the pronunciation of the words that are used and the Spanish that are used. So we have Cuentista, which is what Zoe is. Solis is their god. There are all of these like crazy monsters. Another thing that I loved about this is that people in the background, and of course the relationship between Zoe and Amelia, which is such perfect slow burn. We have people in the background being like, oh, Zoe will be thinking, or the narrator will be thinking, saying, her wife, his husband, they were looking for their partner. And that kind of just completely accepted, recognized relationship status between strangers made me really happy. And Marcus Shiro is another author that I will read everything that they write. So then we have N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth Trilogy. I have the last two here. I gave my first book to a friend and I'm going to give these to her soon. This series, so stunning. So this is almost like a little bit of a stretch because there's one relationship that kind of defies boundaries in that we have gay man, I think he's canonically gay, a woman and their island dwelling husband. I think the three of them kind of think of themselves as married and have a child together. But relationships are not, or sexualities even, are not really defined, especially because the two first characters are raised in this really damaging system where they are told to have a child together and like kind of forced to have a child together, even though they might not have chosen each other otherwise. So not necessarily the perfect representation, but stellar trilogy, just incredible. Again, N.K. Jemisin can do no wrong. So the books that I'm recommending are really just like ones that I love from authors that I'm obsessed with. Then next up I have Tuesday When He Talks to Ghosts, and the relationship that falls under the LGBT plus umbrella here is, it's not Tuesday, it's her best friend and Rabbit, who's the main character from her first book, which is Bellwether Rhapsody, which is more focused on Rabbit's sexuality, and you should definitely read that book as well. But Tuesday When He Talks to Ghosts takes place in Boston, so for me this is a very special book because it feels kind of like The West End Game, which was a book that I absolutely loved as a child. There's this whole mystery that involves finding clues that are hidden around the city. They run into like a T tunnel at one point. So the T is our MBTA, which is our mass transit system. So they find clues in the train, and I know exactly where they are, and I could just see it. I could see everything that they were doing. And yeah, I mean, it's in this book, it's kind of more of a subplot because there's a lot going on in the main plot with Tuesday, but I love them. And they're a very like sweet counterpoint to the bad things that happen to the other characters. So Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghosts, also just a book that I want to recommend because it doesn't get any hype, and it deserves all of the hype in my personal opinion. Then I also met Kate Reculio, who's the author, at an American Library Association conference. I made my friend wait with me like 20 minutes before she got there. We were first in line, and she showed up. She's like, "Wait, are you guys all here for me?" And we were like, "Yes." I had listened to like half of the book on audio before getting this book from her, and I just love it so much. I painted one of these for my Christmas tree, like on a little ornament. I sent her one too. Yeah, I'm obsessed with her, and she's just absolutely lovely on Instagram. So if you read it, you might be able to be friendly with the author, which is always fun. Then I have a list of books that I read and loved but don't have with me, and this one is also quite long. So we have Felix Ever After by Kaysen Callender. I have a review up as a video, and I just love this book so much. It's messy and like perfectly teenager. And it deserves a TV show because it's set in an art school in New York City. And there's just so much going on. And it deals with identity and how identity can be more nuanced even than what labels suggest. So Felix is a trans teenager, a trans boy, artist, growing up in New York City, and he feels a bit like he is one too many minority to be loved, which absolutely broke my heart. He goes through some trials. He also goes to different like LGBT plus centers to get to know more about how he identifies and talk to people who identify differently. It has a lot of information, but it doesn't feel like an info dump, and it also doesn't feel like it's trying to force people to learn or understand, even though it does. And there's a couple of romance plots, and it's messy because he's a teenager, and his relationship with his dad is kind of rocky because his dad doesn't want to let go of who Felix was before he transitioned. Big trigger warning for dead naming and just like a really evil action at the beginning. And look up the trigger warnings. It's awful. Absolutely awful at that, what happens at the beginning of the book. But then after that, everything is perfect. And I love it so much. Then I have a lot of graphic novels that I read and loved. So Heartstopper, of course, by Alice Oseman. Volume 4 just came out, and we're getting a TV show, so we have been blessed. Then I have Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker and Wendy Zhu, and I read that last month for part of the Asian readathon. It's about witches. So we have a non-binary werewolf character and a disabled witch girlfriend. And they have to figure out who the big bad is and defeat them so that they can be together. Then I also read in this same category Snapdragon, which has great trans representation and also features witches. Very fun. The Goldie Vance series is along the lines of like Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys, kind of historical setting for a murder mystery or just mystery solving. And Goldie just like quietly gets together with her huge crush on the coolest girl in town who works at the record store, and they're very sweet. So if you want just kind of no sad, only cute, pick up the Goldie Vance series. I read Juliet Takes a Breath as a graphic novel, and that was absolutely stunning. It handles intersection in the ways that white women can be very disappointing, and romance all at the same time, and just, stunning. I want to read the actual physical book now as well, because I loved the graphic novel so much. Then I also have The Magic Fish, which was so good and just heartwarming and made me cry. So our main character is afraid of coming out to his parents, who are immigrants, so might have different opinions. He's worried because he doesn't even know the word for his own sexuality in his parents' native language. And there's also this story interwoven kind of along the same lines as Cinderella, and his mom, when she accepts, she changes the story in such a beautiful way. Again, I'm gonna recommend that people check trigger warnings for everything on this list, because I believe this one has trigger warning for like death of a parent. So be careful. 2 more graphic novels that I read and really liked. So we have Bloom and Kiss Number 8. Bloom is another just like very sweet story of a baker's child who doesn't really want to be a baker anymore. He wants to run off to the big city and become a musician, and the boy next door who just wants to bake and who becomes kind of a fixture in the family's life, and what happens after that. Very sweet. Not like the most detailed or the most like challenging story, so that's also kind of nice. Then the next one, Kiss Number 8, is very complicated because it features a bi main character whose attraction to girls causes her a lot of problems with her family and with her community. We have a grandparent who is trans and was kicked out of his son's life as a result, and then this son, who's the dad of our main character, is kind of force-fed really harmful rhetoric that is overlaid on like memories that we see of him interacting with his trans father that are really sweet, and like just shows that like kids at their base aren't transphobic and at their base aren't hateful and can kind of be indoctrinated by adults in their lives. I included a like more in-depth review that made me cry on my video about reading graphic novels and crying in a certain month. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, you can go check it out on the other video. Other books in this section: You Should See Me in a Crown. Stellar. Loved it so much. High school setting, prom season, new girl is very cute, main girl needs to win prom queen even though she doesn't really want to partake because she needs the scholarship money that comes along with the crown. Liz Leidy is just absolutely she's such a good character because she has flaws and she has things that she's scared of, and oh god, I just love her so much. So read You Should See Me in a Crown. Then I absolutely loved this audiobook for this nonfiction book called Ace: What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. I think it's a book that everyone should read. When it's out in paperback, I will have my own copy and I will be like rereading it once a month. It is so good. And again, I really think everyone should read it because we have these prescribed ideas of what relationships should look like, and people don't really investigate that in themselves in terms of what makes them comfortable, what things they like or don't like the things that they haven't even thought about. And it handles asexuality in a very intersectional way. There's an especially interesting part about asexuality and the disabled community, because disabled aces kind of fit in the middle where they're not fully accepted by either category, at least as presented in this book. Where in the ace community, they feel like they're not ace enough almost, because the ace community wants to be like, well, it's not a disability, it's a sexuality. And then in the disabled community, they have to fight to be like, no, we're allowed to be sexual beings because we're not just objects. Like, we are people and we have desires and needs as well. It really struck me reading that part and hearing the point of view of disabled aces, and oh, it's so good. And it covers that for a whole range of things, and I really loved it, especially because Angela Chen uses we when speaking of the ace community instead of saying they. So it definitely feels more of an inclusive conversation as opposed to a scientific presentation. And then lastly, for this recommendation section was Cemetery Boys, which was a book that I absolutely loved. Aidan Thomas is really fun to follow on social media, and I love the story he created. It's so good. More trans-owned voices narratives. That's really what the world and the book community needs. All right, so moving on to books that I have that I need to get to in part 2, because this has been already a lot of filming. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll keep an eye out for this next one that I hope I can get out within the next day or two. So, see you guys very soon. In the meantime, let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books, if you're going to now that you've seen them in this video, and happy reading. Bye!